Hi friends, what is the best legend to use in Apex Legends Season 9? That's a tough question, but there are some legends that might be able to give you the advantage if you're able to use them. In this video, I've put together a legends tier list specifically for arena mode, based on a poll I put out on YouTube, but also my own experience playing arena mode. Ultimately, it will come down to who you feel most comfortable with playing with, but I do hope this list will give you a few ideas if you're wondering who you should use to give you an advantage in arena mode. Now I feel arena mode has a slightly different meta to your normal battle royale mode. The maps are much smaller and there's less ground to maneuver around in, so your abilities and the type of legend you use can be really important in arena mode. I will try and do a separate battle royale mode list as well, but for this one let's focus on arena mode. Let's start with C tier. In C tier we've got Fuse, Crypto, Mirage and Revenant. Let me talk through why I've put each of these legends in C tier. Again, they are all still useful, but like I said, these guys in C tier might have a few limitations that you might find when you're using them in arena mode. Starting with why I've put Fuse here, his abilities, if I'm being honest, just aren't as useful as some of the others on this list. His passive isn't great for arena mode because it's unlikely you'll be able to afford too many grenades, and double stacking of course doesn't apply in arena mode. Now his tactical is quite cool because essentially it's like having 2 free extra grenades, but at the same time it doesn't tend to do too much damage, and if I'm being honest, even in the battle royale mode I tend to use the tactical more to break down doors and zone enemies into certain areas. But of course that isn't so much an issue in arena mode because you just don't have so many doors or areas that you need to zone. And of course we then have Fuse's ultimate, which I would probably say is one of the least useful ultimates at the moment. It's very easy to judge where it's going to land, and even if you do land it around an enemy, unless the enemy doesn't really know what the ultimate is, they're probably not going to get hit by the ultimate. So really all you're doing is just trapping an enemy in the middle of some fire which disappears eventually. And for the most part, you probably won't do much damage. And that's the main reason I put Fuse here. Those 2 free extra grenades you get with his tactical are probably the most useful thing about Fuse for arena mode. I've also put Crypto here because his drone, while it's useful, only has one use, as standard. So if an enemy shoots that drone, unless you've bought more of the drones, you've lost your drone for the rest of the game. And what that means is you then also lose his passive, because without the drone, you don't get Crypto's passive. And at the same time, if you're using the drone in the game, then you're not supporting your team because you have to be in the drone, which then means your team is in a 3v2 situation. And on a small map, when there's only one other team you have to face, it's probably not great to put your team in that situation. You don't have large areas that you can scale on the map because it's such a small arena map, which means you don't really want to spend too much time in your drone. Now the EMP itself can be quite useful, and it's a particularly good ultimate for a number of situations. For example, if you're trying to push an enemy team, or an enemy team is trying to push you. But here's the issue with the ultimate. It's one of the most expensive along with Revenant at 600 crafting materials, so you'll have to sacrifice a lot to buy it. It won't even let you buy it in early rounds, so you're going to have to wait till later rounds before you can actually be allowed to buy it. But then when you get to those rounds, you then need to sacrifice a lot of crafting materials to buy it. So if you look at what the ult does versus the amount it costs, you might actually find it's not really worth that expense. And without these things, you then have Crypto, who doesn't really have any abilities that can help your team due to either cost or the situation that you're in. And that's why Crypto sits in C tier for me. I've also put Mirage here because I find in a small environment like arenas, where you're closer together, it's a lot easier to spot which is the real Mirage. And I say this because teams tend to be focused on you a lot, so when you're trying to use Mirage's ability, they'll be looking at you and they'll know which one is the real Mirage. Now having said that, there are some good times where a Bamboozle will definitely help you, and I definitely find his tactical is more useful than his ultimate. The tactical's quite cheap, you get a few charges with it from the start, and it's a good way to bamboozle people in terms of when you're repositioning. I find his ultimates not very useful in arena mode. There's a lot more close-up fighting and enemies tend to keep a good eye on you, and that's one of the main reasons I put Mirage here. I should say Mirage's passive of the Cloaked Revive is really useful, but again, if you're a seasoned Apex player, the audio alone is enough to tell where Mirage is. So while this could be useful in a lot of circumstances, I would say it's only partially useful depending on the quality of enemy that you're facing, and that's why I feel Mirage is a little bit limited in arena mode. The final one in this category is Revenant. So the passive ability to climb isn't really useful in arena mode. Most of the maps don't really have super high spaces, So in this sense, Revenant isn't really making use of his passive. The tactical ability is probably the most useful piece of Revenant's kit for arena mode. It's really useful to shut down other legends' abilities, especially a lifeline when she's trying to drone revive people. Revenant's tactical can be really useful here. And of course you would think the ultimate for Revenant would be good, and it is, except for the fact it's the most expensive in the game, so you won't really be able to buy it until later rounds, probably past round 3. Unless you grab all of the crafting material canisters in the previous round. So this really makes the ultimate very hard to buy, and once you do buy it, even if you are able to push a team, if you get reset back to the totem, you've already lost 50 HP. In a game mode where your heals are limited, do you really want to be sacrificing your health? It's a good question, so this makes the ultimate not as good as it actually could be. Next we've got B tier. In B tier we've got Wattson, Caustic and Rampart. Again, these legends are useful, but not all of the time. If we look at Wattson, the arena maps are just really open, with less buildings and structures, and that kind of makes the fences quite limited. The benefit is that Wattson does start with more tacticals than any other legend, with 5. Although, you do need to use 2 in one go to create a fence, which actually makes this seem like more than you're actually getting. The passive shield regen is also quite useful due to the limited heals, but actually it's quite deceptive because the passive shield regen is really slow, and actually from what I found, you don't really have enough time between taking damage and having to fight the enemy team for your shield to fully regen, so ultimately you will end up having to use shield batteries or shield cells, and this really means that the passive isn't as useful as it could be. Now the ultimate is probably the most useful element of Wattson in a team environment, not really to stop the grenades because like I said, due to the cost of grenades and throwables, you'll find teams don't have too many to throw at you, but it is useful because it gives you and your team free shield regeneration at a much faster rate than Wattson's passive shield regen. Another one I felt sits in this category is Caustic. His abilities can be useful if a team pushes you, but because the arena maps are so open, those 3 gas canisters you start with won't really be as useful as you would think. He's also a bigger legend, and you don't really want that in a game mode like this, where you're going to be taking a lot of enemy fire. If we think about his ultimate, again, it's fairly useful, but it's also limited in range. Plus, it won't actually let you buy it in the first few rounds, so you're going to have to wait before you can even buy it. Which almost means, for the early rounds, the ultimate is kind of useless, because you just won't be able to buy it. Rampart is the last legend in B tier. Now this was a tricky one, because Rampart's passive is actually really useful, particularly at the start of the game, in round 1, 2 and maybe even 3, where crafting materials are very limited and people can't afford extended mags, so the extra ammo you get on LMGs with Rampart can really help a lot. Obviously it's not quite as useful as the rounds move on and people can afford extended mags, but if you can win the first 2 rounds then you've got a big advantage, and Rampart's passive can definitely help you do that. Her tactical is also really useful. Her amped walls can definitely give you an advantage if you can take the ring early. It really limits people's ability to push you. Having said that, there are a few easy counters to her tactical, especially if you've got someone like a Valkyrie on the enemy team. They can easily fire their rockets and really hit your position hard. Other legends like Fuse, or even just buying an Arc Star, can be an easy way to effect a Rampart behind her tactical. So while her tactical can be really strong, there are a few easy counters to it. And again, her ultimate can be quite useful due to the damage it can deal, but it's very situational, it makes you very static, and I found you can deal some decent damage with it, but it's not as much of a game changer as you might think. Moving on to A tier, here we've got Horizon, Octane, Pathfinder, Loba, Valkyrie and Bangalore. Now the reason there are more legends in A tier is because I think all of these legends are really good for arena mode. Plus when I put out the poll on YouTube, these seem to be the more popular of the legends. Starting with Bangalore, she sits in A tier because her abilities are so useful. And I'm mainly thinking about her tactical and her passive. You see, the smoke can be a great way to reposition in arena mode, but it's also a great way to push with cover. In addition to this, the smoke is a really great way to cover you or your teammates while they're grabbing the materials from the canister or even the meds from the supply bin. and if you didn't know, the smoke received a buff this season, where it's a lot thicker and harder for enemies to see through. The main reason Bangalore isn't in S tier is because by round 3 and onwards, it's really easy for enemies to afford digital threat sights on their weapons, and of course if you've got that, it becomes really easy to shoot through the smoke. Thinking about Bangalore's ultimate, now it's actually really expensive and not as effective as it is in Battle Royale. If we think about the use case for her ultimate, it's mainly used to zone and reposition over a large area. But arena maps are a lot smaller, and a lot of the time you end up getting stunned by your own ultimate because of how small the map is, and that means it's not super useful for arena mode. I did mention her passive is useful, that speed boost can really help in the early rounds, but as soon as you get to close quarters fighting, which happens a lot in arena mode, I find it's not quite as useful. But overall I think Bangalore is a solid legend, and A tier is a great place for Bangalore. We do have most of the movement legends in A tier as well. We've got Horizon, Octane, Pathfinder and Valkyrie, and they all sit here because their movement abilities are really useful. Pathfinder probably has a bit of an advantage over the other 3, just purely because of the cost of both his tactical and ultimate being a lot cheaper, and he also starts with 3 grapples, which can be really effective in a game. In fact, in terms of abilities, at 150, they are joint cheapest in the game, along with a few other legends. The main reason Pathfinder doesn't make it into S tier is because his passive is completely useless in arena mode. As you know, there are no beacons to scan, so it just feels like he's missing a passive, and that's kind of the main reason why Pathfinder is in A tier rather than S tier. I also think Horizon would be S tier without her nerf this season, but obviously she's had quite a big nerf, which means I think she has to drop to A tier. The tactical was just so slow now, and you can't sit on top of it for more than 2 seconds. Plus, Horizon's stray speed on top of the tactical has also been nerfed. Even the Respawn devs confirmed that her win rate has dropped all the way down to 6th place. Her ultimate is also fairly expensive for what it is. At 400 materials, you won't be able to afford it till later rounds, unless you sacrifice the quality of your weapons, which you don't really want to be doing. Having said that though, I would say she's still a strong legend. Her passive can help you move around the ground a lot quicker when dropping from height, and her tactical does still let her get herself and her team to higher ground, but also to reposition a little bit quicker. Octane is another one that sits in A tier rather than S tier. The fact that his stim does so much damage now just means you can't run straight into a fight, otherwise you'll be at a big disadvantage, and that's something you don't really want in arena mode, where it's quite an intense squad v squad battle. I had a game where a random teammate was Octane and he just kept stimming straight into the enemy and dying straight away, and this instantly put the team at a 3v2 disadvantage. So the trick to use Octane's stim is either to use it to grab the materials and meds nice and early, or to flank the enemy team and then coordinate an attack with your team, but it's not a great tool to just stim straight into the enemy, so bear that in mind. Now the fact that Octane does auto recover health with his passive is a big benefit, especially in this mode, as I've mentioned a few times, where heals are very limited, so his passive to regenerate his health automatically can be really useful, particularly in the early rounds where most people won't be able to afford many heals. Now the jump pad at 300 can also be useful in later rounds because it can get your team around the map a lot quicker, and if you can secure a strong position before the enemy team, this can give you a big advantage. I would say it's probably a little expensive to buy early on though, so you'll probably have to wait till round 3 and onwards before you can start affording the jump pad without sacrificing too much in terms of weapons. Valkyrie also sits in A tier, mainly because of her passive, as it's the only movement ability that you can continuously use without having to buy more. Unlike Pathfinder and Horizon, you can keep boosting to high ground without a cost. All it requires is the fuel, but that fuel auto recharges for free during the game and it only takes a few seconds. Her tactical is also really useful in arena mode, particularly against camping legends like a Rampart, but is also a good way to hit downed opponents if they slunk behind cover. I actually like to use the tactical as a way to push as well, because don't forget it stuns enemy opponents, so you can hit a team with the tactical and then use the passive to boost across quickly and take out the enemy team. I do see people using her ultimate as well. It is super cheap and it's a good way to see where the enemy team are. Personally, I don't think it's super useful in arena mode because the maps are so small. My recommendation would be save the 150 materials that the ultimate would cost and spend it on something else, maybe improving your weapons or even buying another tactical. The final legend we have in A tier is Loba. Now if you're a supporter of the channel, you know Loba is my main. Loba did receive a buff this season, and that buff lets her move at full speed while throwing but also landing with her bracelet. It's also one of the few tacticals that lets you almost instantly jump across pretty much the whole map, whichever map you're on. And this is really useful because you can use it to run and get the meds and the materials nice and early, and then use your tactical to regroup with your team, without risking taking damage from the enemy team. I do feel like Loba's slightly underrated this season, but I'm sure people will start to notice soon. Her ultimate is really useful and cheap as well. In fact, her ultimate can actually save you crafting materials, because if you use it to steal meds from the supply bins, it means you won't need to buy shield batteries or med kits. Plus, you can't even buy Phoenix kits, so it's a great way to grab those as well. Now let me give you a bit of maths to support this. You see, there's 2 shield batteries, 1 med kit and 1 Phoenix kit guaranteed in every supply bin. Of course, you can't buy Phoenix kits, but the value of the shield batteries and the med kits alone are 350 crafting materials, and if you place the ultimate in the right place, you can actually hit 2 supply bins at the same time, meaning you could save up to 700 crafting materials, and that's not even including the value of the Phoenix kits. And on top of this, you're stopping the enemy team grabbing those heals as well. And if you compare the cost of her ultimate at only 200 crafting materials, you actually make a big saving here for you and your whole team. And you can then use this saving to buy grenades or even improve your weapons that you have, so this can give you a big advantage in the game. Now I will admit, Loba's passive is slightly useless for this game mode, but overall I do think Loba's really strong for the arena mode, and that's exactly why I think she sits in A tier. Now moving on to the best legends that you can use for arena mode, and these are the legends that sit in S tier. In S tier we have Lifeline, Gibraltar, Wraith and Bloodhound. Starting with Lifeline, Lifeline's a really easy legend to put in S tier, particularly for arena mode. The devs actually confirmed that Lifeline has one of the highest win rates and pick rates in arena mode, and it's easy to understand why. Her passive drone is really strong, especially now that you can revive 2 players while still being able to defend. Her ability to open extra compartments on the supply bin also means you get extra free shields. Each compartment contains 4 extra shield cells, and this can save you 150 crafting materials. It's also a free ability, so you don't even need to buy it, so you basically get 4 extra shield cells for free. Her tactical also means free heals at important times. Like I said a few times in this video already, the number of heals are limited, so having a drone that can regenerate your whole health is a really great option. I would say that her ultimate is probably the only questionable part of her kit for arena mode. Of course it's useful to get you those free supplies in terms of medkits and shield cells, but at 400 crafting materials and the fact that it takes a long time to land, it's probably not the best ultimate to use. Although a cool thing you can do with it is actually to use it as cover, but for the most part I would say save yourself 400 crafting materials and spend it on improving your weapons or even buying grenades. Gibraltar also sits in S tier. His gun shield is just still crazy strong, because it means you get an extra 50 HP. Plus it regenerates so quickly that you actually get an extra 50 HP multiple times in a round. And this gives you extra peeking ability, which can be really useful for those mid-range fights in arena mode. The dome shield is also really useful. You can use it to protect yourself when securing the supply bins and materials, but you can also use it as cover when you're pushing a team. At 200 materials, it's one of the most expensive tacticals to buy, so I'd recommend just making use of the first one you get in each round, because you do get one for free in each round. The ultimate is also quite expensive, but it can be useful on certain maps. It's one of the few ultimates that can deal enough damage to wipe a whole team. My main recommendation would actually be trying to down an enemy player first, and then use the ultimate to thirst that downed player, and potentially deal damage to any enemy team members that are trying to revive that downed player. Bloodhound also deserves to be an S tier, because the ability to scan is just so strong. You can see exactly where the enemy team is, and this can really help your positioning. At 150 crafting materials it is expensive, but you do start with 1, and as you get into later rounds, mainly round 4 onwards, you'll start getting enough materials to buy extra scans. The passive is also useful to see where enemy teams have moved. Now you won't really be tracking enemies like you would in a battle royale, but it can be a useful indicator to see where enemy teams are repositioning to. The ultimate is also really strong. It gives you 3 extra scans when you're using the ultimate, and I don't think people have worked this out yet. And that's regardless of whether you've actually bought extra scans or not. As soon as you hit your ultimate, you'll get a bunch of free scans. Of course you do get that movement increase as well, Plus, if you've either got a Bangalore on your team or there's a Bangalore on the enemy team, the ultimate's a really useful counter because you can literally see where the enemies are in the smoke. And that's what makes Bloodhound really strong and why they deserve to be in S tier. The final legend in S tier is Wraith. Now this was a tough one. Wraith last season definitely would not have been in S tier, but the removal of low profile this season has really helped her. I would say she's now viable in fights, even with her bigger hitbox, because it is still smaller than a lot of other legends. Plus her abilities are both the joint cheapest in the game, and it allows you to diversify your tactics, and that's why I feel like Wraith sits in S tier, because her abilities are so cheap, but also so useful. So that's my legend tier list for arena mode in Apex Legends Season 9. I hope this will help you when you're trying to decide which legend to use for arena mode in Apex Legends. I'll try to do something similar for the Battle Royale mode, so keep a lookout for that in the near future. Don't forget to like and subscribe, come join our community of friends. For now though, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you later.